Oral questions. Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The first report cards of the new school year just went home over a few days ago. Now parents of kindergarten-age children have less than 2 weeks to make a critical decision on the next 12 years of their child's education.
Shane.
Early immersion or not. They have many concerns. Classroom teachers have many concerns. We have many concerns. Retired teachers have many concerns. I'd like to share a paragraph from one of their letters sent to the Premier, Education Minister, and myself, and the other party leaders. 2 Anglophone school districts have called for a delay. They are on the ground level. They understand the needs and the ramifications of implementation. Their concerns must be considered. A quality education for New Brunswick students should never be a matter of politics. This was from the letter of the retired teachers. I will begin today's question period by once again asking the Premier to press pause on the political decision. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Premier.
Monsieur le Président, comme j'ai dit à plusieurs reprises, nous avons suivi un rapport qui a été sanctionné par le dernier gouvernement, qui a été fait par 2 anciens ministres de l'Éducation, un d'un gouvernement conservateur, un d'un gouvernement libéral. We have, Mr. Speaker, based our decision on a 2012 report that was commissioned by the previous government, in which the Leader of the Opposition was the Minister of Finance, where it specifically said that French immersion in grade 1 is the best way to go for our province. And it's important to note that this report was done by 2 former education ministers, one of a Liberal government, one of a Conservative government. It's important to note that they were independent. It's important to note that they consulted with New Brunswickers, teachers, educators, experts, students themselves, Mr. Speaker. So we followed that report in 2012. We made a commitment in 2014, and we're following through with that commitment now here today, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier often talks about the report, a report that's very focused on kind of one issue. We didn't follow that report. We didn't have it in our platform because we had response back from teachers in the classroom. We had concerns that the stability was more important in the classroom. Understanding the results of grade 3 was more important in the classroom than us following a report that was very narrow-minded on one issue. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm trying to point out here is people have concerns, more from the retired teachers. Remember that there are more than 2,700 proven, experienced experts. They literally represent a millennial of classroom experience. When they speak about education, any intelligent person would do well to listen. Our retired teachers wrote, indications are enrollment in grade 3 immersion entry point was higher than in the final year of the grade 1 entry point when it existed previously. Does this suggest perhaps that the parents were more prepared to consider immersion once their children and literacy and numeracy basics in their first language? Has the success of grade 3 entry point been evaluated and compared in a meaningful way?
Time.
How does the Premier respond to this question?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I think what that tells us is that many parents across this province would like to see their children go into French immersion. That's a great thing. And there's a report that was done in 2012, Mr. Speaker, that said the best way that we can offer French immersion is in grade 1. Mr. Speaker, I still don't understand, and I'm still very surprised that the opposition is trying to pretend that this report doesn't exist, and when they do acknowledge the report, they question its credibility. It was their government that sanctioned the report. It was their government that put the parameters in place for the report. It was their government that selected the people that were involved in delivering this report. And it was a nonpartisan process. It was independent. They listened to stakeholders across the province. They listened to teachers, educators, people that have a stake in the future of our province and want to see our education system thrive. And they came to a conclusion that restoring French immersion to grade 1 is the right thing to do for our province, and that's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Speaker, it's always convenient to hang your hat on one report, go back on a report that was narrow-minded in focus, look at the current statistics, and people are saying in droves, people are saying, this is wrong, we need stability. It is no secret that without comparable data of a graduating class from the grade 3 entry point, no meaningful comparison can be made. Our retired teachers, those 2,700 plus classroom veterans, write, meaningful and lasting change takes time. It takes careful planning. It takes careful planning by his own admission. The Premier doesn't have a plan or resources in place for this drastic, politically motivated change. The 2017 school year is less than 9 months away. The Premier's claims that resources and a plan will be in place ring hollow. If he won't listen to anyone else, will the Premier listen to our retired teachers who precedently have written a letter saying bring stability to our classroom. Will he press pause on this change to early immersion and let the facts speak for themselves? Thank you.
Honourable the Premier.
It's interesting to see the Leader of the Opposition pick and choose the facts he feels like following, Mr. Speaker. The facts of the matter are there was a report done in 2012 that was independent and nonpartisan, done by two former education ministers of our province, one Conservative, one Liberal. They listened to New Brunswickers, they listened to experts, and they themselves came with the conclusion that restoring French immersion to grade 1 was the right approach for New Brunswick. This was a report commissioned by the Leader of the Opposition's government when he was the Minister of Finance. So, Mr. Speaker, he can't pick and choose the facts he wants to follow. Those are the facts. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are going to do everything we can as a government to try to mitigate some of the challenges that the previous way that we went about French immersion in grade 1 created. And we recognize that there are some challenges. So, Mr. Speaker, we have committed to investing more in education. We have committed to doing everything we can to mitigate those challenges to the best of our ability. And, Mr. Speaker, we are confident that by investing more in education, we're going to give our children the system they deserve.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, what's ironic about the Premier putting so much attention on a report that obviously, narrow in focus, was not even part of his own 10-year plan? Was even in the co-chair, said we want stability above all. We do not believe in implementing anything that will disrupt the classroom such as this. We do not have the facts on the grade 3 immersion, but yet the Premier puts such focus on facts. I want to again refer to the wisdom of our retired teachers. They point out, and I quote, classroom teachers, school administrators, and support staff live the realities of their school communities and classrooms every day. They take concepts and turn them into reality. They know the resources and support that needs and must be put in place and taken into consideration. I couldn't agree more, and as we know, our classroom teachers, administrators, and support staff are muzzled by fear for their jobs and careers if they speak out. Has the Premier given any further consideration to my offer to help put in place a mechanism that will go beyond the political mandates, where the present-day expert can share their wisdom and knowledge and make this the best?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, it's really interesting to hear the Leader of the Opposition. In one breath, in one argument, he'll say that the results that we're getting in our education system are not what we want. He has the audacity to call our education system broken, Mr. Speaker. Then he's advocating in the same day, in the next breath, in the next argument, for stability. Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not going to offer a type of stability that makes us have the same results that we all want to see improve, Mr. Speaker. We are going to offer a stability with a change and reform into our education system that was presented with our 10-year education plans. Monsieur le Président, une des raisons que nous avons développé des plans d'éducation avec l'aide de l'opposition pour 10 ans, c'est pour offrir le système de la stabilité, Monsieur le Président. Mais nous n'allions pas accepter le statu quo parce que le statu quo ne nous offrait pas les résultats que nous voulons pour nos jeunes. So, Mr. Speaker, we have a 10-year education plan in place. It's going to offer stability, and we're going to make record investments to make sure that we get the results wanted.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
So, Mr. Speaker, we agree. 10-year plan. Let's focus on that. The Premier says we want stability. Let's focus on that. The Premier says this new program is going to make changes. Doing the same thing we did 10, 15 years ago is not the answer to the future. We did not get the results we needed then. We seem to be getting better results with the grade 3 by higher participation, but our overall results are very poor. Our system is indeed broken. As many families are contending with the hustle and bustle of holiday season, parents of the kindergarten-age children also have early immersion weighing on their minds. They have been told they must decide by December 20th whether to place their children in grade 1 immersion or not. They've been told they must have faith in the Premier's empty rhetoric that he will have a plan and resources in place. They've been told they must ignore our classroom teachers, thousands of retired teachers, District Education Council, and parents when it comes to the best possible education for their children. This is a terrible burden to place on the parents. Will the Premier put our children first and politics second and press pause on this political move to grade 1?
Time, member. The Honourable the Premier.
Monsieur le Président, il dit que c'est une décision politique. Il ne peut pas même nous donner la courtoisie d'admettre qu'il y avait un plan, qu'il y avait un rapport qui avait été sanctionné par le gouvernement précédent, qui a en effet donné la suggestion et la recommandation de remettre l'immersion précoce en français à la première année. Monsieur le Président, c'est pas une décision politique, c'est une décision qui va aider nos jeunes. C'est une décision qui écoute les Néo-Brunswickoises et Néo-Brunswickois. C'est une décision qui a été recommandée par un rapport qui était non partisan et indépendant. So, Mr. Speaker, I have to ask the Leader of the Opposition to tell New Brunswickers why he is so fixated on only offering the following statements about our education system. That it's broken, in his opinion. That French immersion is to blame on all of the problems that we face, Mr. Speaker, the problems and challenges that we face in our education system. That we are not offering stability, but yet he wants to change the system completely, Mr. Speaker. And why is he arguing that we should not invest more in education?
Time, Premier. Leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier offered early on and say we want fact-based decision-making. We have less than 10% of our kids graduating out of the French immersion program that meet a provincial standard. And that standard is not high enough to qualify for a job in the province. So you say, well, okay, that's all right? I don't think that's all right. You've got 70% of the kids through an English system that aren't even beginning to become bilingual. This is after 40 years. We think that's all right? I don't think that's all right. You've got the Minister of Education saying mediocrity is fine. That's not a problem for our province. Look at me. I got elected several times. I think we should shoot for number one, not mediocrity. I think we should be number one in the province. You are proposing a 10-year plan. I want to be part of that. I want to sign off on a plan that avoids the political interference in the classroom on a go-forward basis. Let's not mess it up. We have an opportunity right now to build the bridge to the classrooms for the future. Mr. Premier, let's make it work. Thank you.
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition's fixation on French immersion is worrisome. The way he's using French immersion as an scapegoat to the challenges facing our education system is worrisome, Mr. Speaker. And the fact that he's trying to muddy the waters and give an impression that there's no plan is very worrisome. Where was he over the last 2 years, Mr. Speaker, where we've been working hard with members of the opposition on top of that, Mr. Speaker, to develop 10-year education plans? He's talking like he doesn't even know they exist. Well, Mr. Speaker, the only time that there was no plan in place when he was the Minister of Finance. The only reason that we face challenges in our system right now, or I should say the main reason, is because he cut into education when he was the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker. And now he has the audacity to call the system broken after he cut into education. He has the audacity to say that French immersion is the problem and is the source of all our challenges, and he has the audacity to say that we're wrong when we say we want to invest the most in education in the history of our province.
Leader of the official opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the philosophy on the other side. It's just throw money in hopes that it'll get better. It was stated by the Minister of Education and the Premier previously that the plan's got to be put together in order to make this change happen in French immersion. And yes, I'm focused on our whole system. Because not only are we not meeting our standards and becoming a bilingual province, as we should easily be after 40 or 50 years, with every child becoming bilingual and being bilingual when they graduate, but our academics and our math and our sciences, ninth in the country. This isn't acceptable. So why don't we get together on a long-term plan, a plan that your own co-chair said, don't disrupt this. Don't throw a mess in the classroom by making changes that are not well planned and well thought out. Understand the facts on the current program before you go and introduce another. All of these things and all of these people saying don't do this, and yet you boldfacedly move on and say we're going to do it. All because of a political decision, Mr. Speaker. There we go again.
Honourable Premier.
Encore une fois, Monsieur le Président, il n'y a pas de question de chef de l'opposition, mais il faut que je fasse des commentaires sur ces commentaires. First off, Mr. Speaker, he wants to sign off on a 10-year education plan. Well, he should have been doing his job as an MLA over the last 2 years and participate in the process that we put in place to develop our 10-year education plans. Other members of the opposition did, Mr. Speaker. Maybe he was too busy running his leadership campaign. Well, Mr. Speaker, we put a good process in place that have delivered strong 10-year education plans offering the stability that New Brunswickers need. And Mr. Speaker, he says that he's talking about the whole system. I think it's pretty clear after the last 10 question periods, he's fixated on one thing. He is fixated on French immersion and trying to blame it for all the challenges we face in our education system. And last but not least, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is making it clear again what the difference is between us and them. The difference is he wants to cut in education. He thinks there's enough money in education, and we want to invest more in education.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, there is a clear difference. It's a very clear difference. I want to get results that benefit this province. I want to get results that you can measure, not results that you just throw out or you fabricate. I want to stick on a point in education because we haven't got results. I want to stick on a point that says our kids can do better. Our kids can be the best in this country. But what do we want to do? Oh, throw money, and people feel good because we're throwing money at it. We don't want to listen to the classroom teachers because what would they know about teaching? And what did the president of the MBTA say? The last thing teachers have a chance to do is teach. What's the issue? It's deeper than just throwing something more in and hope for the best. More importantly, throwing something in we've already done and hoping for the best. We can fix this, but we can't do it by this continual political rhetoric and avoiding the issues. I will not avoid the issues. Our kids can be better, and I want to fight for them. Mr. Premier, let's do it.
The Honourable Premier. The Honourable Premier.
Again, Mr. Speaker, there's no question from the Leader of the Opposition. I mean, we can change the name of this to rant period if he wants, Mr. Speaker. I don't understand how the member opposite can get up and lecture us on results. When he was the Minister of Finance, he did not hit any of his targets to reduce the deficit. We are hitting them all, Mr. Speaker, all the while investing more in education, investing more in health care, and growing the economy at record rates, Mr. Speaker. I will not even take the time to go through his economic record, Mr. Speaker, because I don't want to embarrass him today, but I'll talk about ours. 2015, the economy grew by 2.3%. Working with New Brunswickers, we had the greatest economic growth rate since 2004, and we had the third best in Canada, Mr. Speaker. Yeah. We've increased wages at the fastest rate in Canada, Mr. Speaker. And we're doing that and investing more in education and health care and getting our fiscal house in order.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, sure, let's talk economics. You know, we had a track record that actually measured performance. They have one they fabricate. The AG doesn't agree with it. Richard Sayon doesn't agree with it. We fabricate a deficit and then we take out a contingency fund to make it look like it's coming down. We say we've had this great growth rate. The oil industry and forestry, Mr. Speaker, is the reason for that. What are we going to talk about next year? Because there's nothing in the plan that actually makes a change. Mr. Speaker, the results that were happening were clear. They were getting better. All I want to do is help get on another track that are measured by real performance, not fabricated performance from the Premier's office. We see all kinds of squirrels running around the rooms, and those are squirrels to try to deflect from the real issues. We will stay focused on real issues because real issues are what's going to fix this province. Premier, let's measure real success, not fabricated success from your office.
The Honourable Premier.
Still no question, Mr. Speaker, but this is fantastic. This is great. I'll talk about the former Minister of Finance's record any day, Mr. Speaker. A record in which he did not hit any of his targets to reduce the deficit, yet he still cut in education, yet he still didn't invest in health care, Mr. Speaker. I will talk at length of his economic record as the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker, because it was the worst economic growth rate in a generation, Mr. Speaker, under his government when he was the Minister of Finance. He just doesn't get it. You can't cut your way to prosperity, Mr. Speaker. You have to make strategic investments. Right. In fact, from 2006 to 2014, the cumulative growth rate of the province, Mr. Speaker, was about 2%. In 2015 alone, we grew the economy by 2.3%. The fastest growth rate since 2004, the third best in the country. Those are our measurable results, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Kings Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, understandably, there is a great deal of concern about the huge increase in WorkSafe New Brunswick's premiums, an average of 33%. The minister involved chose to use his media contacts to attack and blame WorkSafe while ducking the responsibility. It's one of the few things this government seems to have perfected. Well, listening to Joel Richardson of the CME, he said that massive worker compensation rate increases, which came largely unannounced, jeopardizes every employer's ability to cover its operating costs. I'd like to ask the minister to help us understand the timeline on this issue. When did the minister first learn rates would be increasing? And when did he meet with the board to discuss this increase?
The Honourable Minister of Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labour.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et je trouve ça un peu ironique de la part de l'opposition de nous poser des questions sur le travail sécuritaire et nous attaquer un peu politiquement. Quand ce qu'on regarde, la racine de partie des défis de travail sécuritaire, c'est vraiment la faute des conservateurs, Monsieur le Président, quand ils ont été au gouvernement. Lorsqu'ils ont présenté un projet de loi en 2013, faire des changements dans la première phase de l'ensemble des recommandations, ça a eu un impact au-delà de 40 millions de dollars, Monsieur le Président, sur les finances de travail sécuritaire. Donc, ce sont des situations où le travail sécuritaire doit gérer. Regarde, à la fin de la journée, ce qui est très important, c'est qu'on veut faire sûr que les bénéfices pour les travailleurs qui sont blessés sur le travail, que les bénéfices sont là pour eux. En même temps, d'une façon responsable, que les taux que les employeurs payent sont abordables et peuvent aussi faire sûr que le accident fund, le fonds des accidents, soit make it sustainable, Monsieur le Président. C'est un dossier très complexe qu'on n'a pas besoin de politique dans ce dossier ici, Monsieur le Président.
Member for King Centre.
Mr. Speaker, when the minister discussed this huge rate increase with the WorkSafe Board, I'm sure they would have been prepared with lots of background information. I'm equally sure that they would have come to the table with some recommendations for the minister to consider. One area of concern that we have learned through the media was the decrease in the investment income. And of course we all know that investments returns, they fluctuate, but it appears that the rate increase was based on 1 year of poor results. I understand that forecasting indicated that a rate increase was necessary. But was such a large increase necessary without a 3 to 5 year trend established? In fact, if you look at 2008, where we had one of the worst investment losses, there was very little rate adjustment. Did the board make any recommendations about controlling costs? And will the minister share with us any and all recommendations the board made to control these costs and rates?
The Honourable Minister of Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, again, ironic coming from the opposition. They are part of the problem. They're part of the problem. They're the people who created this problem as well. When they did the internal review back in 2013, under the former government and former minister, they brought forward a three-phase approach. And when they introduced legislation, Mr. Speaker, it had a tremendous impact on the operations of WorkSafe New Brunswick. And today, WorkSafe New Brunswick is feeling an impact of some of their unintended consequences of over $40 million, Mr. Speaker. They were part of that government. They were part, the member that's asking the question was part of the board that knew everything that was happening today, Mr. Speaker. They're part of the, you have a member on the opposition introducing legislation to increase PTSD. I believe in that, Mr. Speaker. The more insured benefits we can have for the injured workers, I believe in that. But we also have to realize that when you increase the benefits, there's an impact on rates, Mr. Speaker. So it's pretty low coming from the member opposite when they're part of the problem and trying to blame the government on this. I do believe there's no politics.
Minister, member for King Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it's the mandate of WorkSafe New Brunswick to represent stakeholders and provide recommendations and advice to government with respect to legislation. Has there been any such recommendations to the Glant government in light of these huge increases, which adds to the financial burden of those who create jobs in New Brunswick? Has WorkSafe approached government with any advice regarding legislation which might lighten the strain these huge increases put on our fragile economy? And most importantly, is the minister prepared to make changes to the Act to protect both our workers and our employers? The Premier constantly quotes job numbers, and given the press lately, it is our concern on this side of the House what effect this will have on job numbers. Just recently we read that one company is reconsidering their plan to move their headquarters to New Brunswick. This is not the message we need to send employers of this province. Could the minister please comment on that?
The Honourable Minister of Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know where the member opposite has been over the last several weeks. I have made changes. I have brought forward Bill 15, and it's going to make a number of changes that are going to correct the unintended consequences the former government has brought forward, Mr. Speaker. I did meet with the board. I met them earlier this year, Mr. Speaker. We discussed many issues and their concerns that they had. I did have echo a potential rate increase of that magnitude. It was said that it was not going to happen. Unfortunately, it did, and I'm very disappointed. I said that publicly, Mr. Speaker. I met not only with WorkSafe New Brunswick, I met with the Appeals Tribunal, I met with the board of WorkSafe New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker. You know what I did? What we did as a government? We introduced changes. That's Bill 15, and I hope we'll have the support from the opposition. And again, this is a very complex issue. It's one that's very important to New Brunswickers, very important to injured workers. I want to make sure that we have the best benefits for them, that they can get access to the benefits in a timely manner, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're trying to do with the best affordable rates, and we're still one of the lowest rates in the country, Mr. Speaker.
Member for New Maryland Sunbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just have a few brief questions for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure. Last week we experienced our first major winter storm here in central New Brunswick, southern New Brunswick, and Mr. Speaker, many of the subdivisions, or all the subdivisions in many ridings in the capital region are tendered out. They're contracted out to private contractors, and this isn't something new. This is something that's a process that's been happening for several years. But this year, Mr. Speaker, those contracts haven't been fulfilled, and the obligations in those tenders weren't fulfilled in this first storm. Several hours after the storm even finished was before our first piece of equipment actually made it to these subdivisions, Mr. Speaker. These delays drag the economy down a long way, Mr. Speaker. Our first responders can't get to the emergencies. I was just wondering if the Minister could tell us today what actions he's taken so far to go back into the department and see that this doesn't happen again.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member opposite for the question, and very important question. Obviously, we're into the winter season. Safety is always our number one priority at the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure to ensure our roads and our bridges and our transportation system is safe and reliable for the traveling public. There were some issues during the first storm, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I spent an hour and a half at the switchboard taking calls from residents from across the province and heard firsthand some of the problems that happened in certain regions. So I'm very much aware. I've spoke with all of the district engineers throughout the province, and they're certainly looking into the situation and will ensure that they work diligently with each of the contractors that were awarded the contracts to do plowing in these various regions around the province to ensure that they're living up to their responsibility according to the contract that they were given. So thank you for the question. We're on top of it. We're going to continue to work through the district engineers who are responsible for maintaining the service.
Member for New Maryland Sunbury.
Thank you for the answer, Mr. Speaker. What I really would like to know is, inside these contracts, there are penalties for contractors. There are obligations for contractors to present to the department, to the government, levels of insurance that they have, equipment lists that they will have available, and they have to be done on certain dates, Mr. Speaker. And if it's displayed that some of these provisions aren't met, such as the equipment that's readily available to clear our roads for our first responders, for our doctors and our nurses to get to their jobs, and for, Mr. Speaker, our most valuable cargo, our students and their educators to get to their schools, Mr. Speaker, then there are penalties in place for this. They're very strict penalties. They have to be upheld. I want to know today if the Minister will look into this and make sure that those penalties are enforced so this doesn't happen again to our rural New Brunswickers.
Time. Minister of Department of Transportation Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Transportation Infrastructure is responsible for 22,847 kilometers of roads in the province, 3,226 bridges, 3,057 large culverts, as well as over 235,000 smaller culverts. So we have a huge responsibility. And now we're into the winter maintenance program, Mr. Speaker, and we don't take these concerns lightly. That's why I personally spent an hour and a half taking calls from New Brunswickers on the day of the first storm. I heard firsthand some of the concerns that were raised. I want to commend the staff at the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure who work extremely hard to ensure the safety of New Brunswickers and people traveling throughout our province. And again, in terms of contracts that have been awarded, those contractors have to live up to the standards of that contract, and our department is going to ensure through the district engineers that that is done.
Member for New Maryland Sunbury.
I can appreciate that the minister takes this seriously, Mr. Speaker, but I want to ensure that the minister is sending the message down to the people that are responsible for looking after this, that it is serious for the taxpayers of New Brunswick. People in these subdivisions pay the same taxes as people that live on Class A roads. There is a policy in place, a minimum standard policy for snow removal in these roads, and it needs to be upheld. Mr. Speaker, what would be really helpful is if the minister would put together a meeting between the district staff, the contractors responsible, and the MLAs that are affected by this that represent the areas that were missed out on this. Would the minister take me up on that offer, invite us all to a meeting with district staff, the contractors involved, so we can share our issues and our complaints and see how we can move this forward so everybody gets the timely service that's awarded to them, that's offered to them, and that they're expected to receive.
The Honourable Minister of Department of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, thank you to the member opposite for the question. Bit of a unique strategy from the member opposite. The meeting's already been held. We've met with the engineers around the province. The engineers have already had meetings with the contractors where there were some situations that arose. I find it rather unique that if the member opposite is really concerned about what's going on, he should have reached out to me or called the department or called the local engineer, just like the New Brunswickers that called me when I was taking calls at the switchboard earlier this week during the first snowfall. Rather than stand up in the legislature and try to score political points. Again, I want to reiterate, I'm very proud of the entire team, over 1,700 employees at the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure who work extremely hard. And I find it a little bit unique on how the member is approaching that. Rather than reaching out to his local engineer, he has the number. If he doesn't, I'll send it to him because they're there to work for all New Brunswickers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Members